Hi everybody, I'm Byron. Today I'm going to go over the 5 most contested elections in presidential history. That was a long sentence, I need to take a breath. Alright, few notes on the criteria. I am only counting elections that were contested after the fact. Things that happened after actual election day. Like, well, election day on this election, the day was a whole month, October 3rd, 31st to December 3rd. But later on it'll just be a day. And I'm only counting ones that were contested by the candidate, by the presidential candidate who lost. All elections are contested up until they're actually held, and after every election there's some people who are upset and try to get it overturned. I'm only counting the ones where it was the people who actually ran who tried to get it overturned. And that not only leads us to just a top 5, but there are really only 5 elections that fit that criteria. The first one is incorrect. I have the incorrect election up here. It is actually the election before that. No, it's not. This is right. Never mind. I don't know what I'm thinking. This is the 1800 election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. The first 2 elections involve something that could still happen whenever there's not a majority of people who get the electoral college. It goes to the House. And the House of Representatives decides state by state. Each state just gets 1 vote. So in this one, and that's what's called a contingent election. And it's usually right underneath, on the Wikipedia page, it's right under the regular election. And you'll notice, on this one, the people running in the contingent election are 2 different people than who ran in the original election. That is, that's why this is 5th, not 4th. Because they're both in the same party. What actually happens doesn't really matter that much, as much as if they were 2 different parties. But one thing that makes this really contentious, look here, 36 ballots. They voted 35 times without a decision. Alright, and to win the contingent election, you have to have the majority of states, more than 50% of the states. So, what happened was, Thomas Jefferson beat John Adams. He beat John Adams. But because back then, the way they voted for president and vice president was weird, Thomas Jefferson's vice presidential candidate got as many votes as Thomas Jefferson did. So they went to the contingent election, and Aaron Burr, rather than saying, I was the vice presidential candidate, I'll just be vice president, no, he said, I actually want to be president. So it went down, and a lot of people... Where's that election? Oh, this is interesting. Look at all these things that had no popular vote. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright. There's only a few states that had a popular vote, and some of them, it looks like, this guy got 75 votes in Kentucky. Don't know what happened there. Maybe this link will tell us. I wonder what it says. Let's figure it out. I prepared for this, but, sometimes... Okay, it looks like they just voted district by district. And that's what they're counting as the number of votes. Because in the early days, sometimes states would pick however they wanted to do it for their electoral college, and in Kentucky and in many other states, they just divided their state up into a number of districts and held an election per district for president. They didn't do a winner-take-all thing. So let's go back up. But look at all these states without popular votes. And I guess the reason... No, wait, it just says 75. Oh... Okay, so only this district counted things. What is Kentucky 2? Have been lost. They've been lost. Okay. For an elector. Alright, so there were 44 votes for who knows. So all we know is that 75 people voted for Thomas Jefferson in the Kentucky 2nd. Which, let's just guess, was Lexington. Alright. But look at all these things that didn't have a popular vote at all. They just got decided by the legislature. This changes over time, and... Alright. But anyway, what we're interested in here is the contingent election. There's Aaron Burr, always looking at him from the side. And here is the contention. Alright. Alright, and this is how it happened. These 2 states couldn't decide. This is not how I remember this happening. This is so weird. I prepared, and yet I don't know anything. So I thought the main thing was New York, and that New York But looks like it wasn't. Looks like New York went for Jefferson every single time. All right. But what happened in the end was that Hamilton convinced these states, Maryland, Vermont, and I guess Delaware and South Carolina, to change their votes from Burr to Hamilton. So eventually Jefferson won on the 36th ballot. I wonder how long it took. Does it say how long it took? February 17th, 11th to 17th. So it wasn't that long. It was just like that McCarthy election we just had. Alright, that was about the same amount of time. Yeah, but eventually Jefferson won. I think it was Hamilton. I think some people just got tired. I think Jefferson had more votes. Yeah, Jefferson certainly had more votes. And look at this. People just didn't vote. No one changed their vote. People just didn't vote instead of voting. That was what changed. So anyway, and of course we all know that after this happened, Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. Look, 9 votes. They say the closest election was 2000 with 530 some votes. This one was 9 votes. Of course, they're not being counted the same way. All right. So Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel and killed him. So we're at the start of this list, and we're already at a body count. All right. So now we're moving on to election number. I've opened up a new tab. Let's just skip them. Election number 4, which is the 1824 election. Very similar to the 1800 election in that it went to the House through the normal means, but it's more contentious because they were actually people who differed politically, even though they both say Democratic Republican. They're different. These are the Adams-Clay Republicans versus the Jacksonian Republicans. And Clay is sort of the important person, because when it goes to the House, only the top 3 go to the House, and notice that Clay was number 4. So he did not get moved to the House, but he was, at the time, Speaker of the House. And he was accused of switching, using his influence to give Adams the election, even though Jackson won more electoral votes and more popular votes. So look, here's it's right up here, isn't it? All right, here's the contingent election. Look who changed. All of Clay's votes went to Adams, and Illinois and some other states went to Adams. But Illinois is interesting because it just has one representative. So the one guy was casting one vote because it happens state by state. And the Illinois representative chose it. It's in here somewhere. Because of slavery. Where it says it in here somewhere. I'm not going to look for it. Illinois chose Adams because of slavery. The Adamses were like the early anti-slavery founding fathers. It's sometimes underplayed, it's sometimes overplayed, but it's sometimes underplayed to say that it mostly happened after their presidency. But here we have a guy choosing before he's even president to support Adams because of his views on slavery. So his views on slavery did impact his work, and it impacted the elections that happened. And Jackson was pretty mad, and the fact that he won the popular vote made him come back next time and win. He won outright in the next election, carrying almost all of these states that Clay carried. He probably even got some that Adams got. What's Adams? Adams is green. Looks like he got some of the New England states. He got New York. Yeah, New York went for Adams, and now it went for Jackson. I think there were... Maryland. What happened to Maryland? Looks like Maryland switched from Jackson to Adams. So that's interesting. Alright, but Jackson took most of the states. And Adams lost that second election. So, in a way, Jackson actually came out the winner because he became president. He came back next time and he won. But he didn't win that election. Alright, now for the third most contested election in American history, and no more of them are going to be decided by the House through the normal means. Number 2000. The election of 2000. Alright, this is one many of you probably remember. This is actually the only one that never went to Congress in any way on this list. But in it all came down, we remember, to Florida. None of these other... I think New Mexico was also a toss-up at the day, but it didn't wind up mattering. Whoever won Florida was going to win the election. Alright, so... I'm drawing a blank because I'm trying to actually remember, rather than remember knowledge of history, I'm actually trying to remember what happened. But, okay, so the Florida election law had two things for recounts. A recount happened, and this is what popularized the phrase for me, I demand a recount. And there are two interesting things about Florida recounts. One, that the person demanding the recount just has certain counties, even certain precincts, be recounted. He doesn't have to... the whole state doesn't have to be recounted, and the person who decides is the person who demanded the recount, i.e. the person who actually lost the state in the first go. So they get to decide what states are recounted, and Gore chose the districts and precincts that probably favored him. So a recount would probably give him a few more votes than if they counted the whole state. So that was one controversy. Oh, there was a debate? Oh, that was the vice presidential debate in Kentucky. Alright. Still, Kentucky went for Clinton both years, so it was sort of a swing state at this point. Alright. So the second thing that mattered, that was interesting about the Florida recount law, is it all had to be done by a certain date. Now, this is a very weird thing, because, one, your vote should count. It doesn't matter how long it takes to count it. It should count. But on the other hand, you got to be done by a certain time. If you can't be done by a certain time, what do? You got to be done by the time the Electoral College meets, by the time Congress meets to certify the election. You just got to be done by a certain point. So there has to be... You have to set a date. But at the same time, if you can't make the date, people's votes don't get counted. So it's really a problem with no good answer. And Florida, I think... Maybe not. I mean, the last election was different, but I think even in 2016 they had a lot of trouble getting all the votes counted in time, and just on the first ballot, not even the recounts. So went to the Supreme Court, famously, and a lot of people say that the Supreme Court decided this election in Bush v. Gore, where they decided that the recount couldn't happen. It was much more complicated than that, but they basically decided that the recount couldn't happen if it didn't meet the deadline. Because, and I sort of agree with this, that the law is the law. You have to follow the law. If the law says the count has to be done by this date, that's when the count has to be done by. The law may be a bad law, and they may have been able to overturn the law, but again, you come back to that problem. How do you just not have a date? Because if that law is unconstitutional, then you can't just have a date. So how do you not have a date? How do you just say it can take forever, as long as it takes? What if it never happens? What do you do on January 20th? So there has to be a date. Alright. So I wound up deciding, and so this goes back to, I guess, mostly Baker v. Carr, which determined that every single vote has to count equally. And that's why, if you may have noticed to your state senate, it doesn't work the way the U.S. Senate does. You'd think maybe a state senate would go county by county and pick every single county and have one senator for each county. But no state does that, because no state is allowed to do that. Because the senators all have to be proportional, the same as the House on the state level, even if not at the federal level, because within each state, at least, the Supreme Court has held that every single vote counts the same. One man, one vote. And that's what they were trying to do here. Like I said, it's very complicated. There's no good answer. That's the decision they tried to make. That's how they tried to justify the decision. If you want to be more against the decision, that you say that's how they try to justify it. If you want to be more for the decision, you would say that's what they were trying to do. That's the decision they were trying to make, is how to make every single vote count the same. So in the end, Bush won the election. And after Bush won the election, this was a scene in the movie Fahrenheit 9/11, showed Gore having to preside over the certification. After every election, after the Electoral College's count, the votes go to Congress, and they wind up being certified. So that so that the Congress determines whether or not the votes count. And Gore had to preside over. Oh no! Oh no! Well, so I tested this, and it just let me look at it last time. But now it's asking for a password, and I don't. I mean, I could just get a password. You reach your limit of free articles. Maybe it counted that article, and then it's counting this as the second one. But if you just create an account on New York Times, you can see a few other free articles. There's an ABC article that I also did. I decided to go with this one, but I can just go to the ABC article. There. Although this article isn't, as fun. It just tells you what happened, and it gives you some historical context. So here's the ABC article. If you can, go read the New York Times article. It's really fun. I'm probably going to talk about it later. But anyway, some congressmen, no senators, some congressmen tried to not have the votes from Florida. I think it was from Florida specifically. Tried to not have those votes counted. And they were unsuccessful because the way it works is you have to get a representative and a senator to object. And then it goes to both houses, and they can decide to sustain or overrule the objection. And if they're not sustained, they are overruled. Both houses have to vote for a majority. And so it was presented in Fahrenheit 9/11 as this big tragedy that Gore had to overlook his own defeat. But he was actually fairly jovial about it. He had some fun there. He was laughing. He gets portrayed as like this boring stick of wood. But if you actually watch the whole thing, or at least read what happened, which I did, I didn't watch it. I didn't watch the whole thing. I only watched it on Fahrenheit 9/11. But if you read the whole story, he seems like a kind of a nice guy. And, he doesn't seem like a sore loser at all. And I always thought that elections that are close, it doesn't matter if the wrong guy wins. That's sort of an awful thing to say, maybe. But if the election's close, it doesn't. Bush, and even before the election, I remember this. People were complaining how alike Bush and Gore were. And especially on foreign policy, and Bush's presidency wound up being defined by foreign policy. So who knows? Kennedy and Nixon, sort of a similar thing. People complained that they were all the same, and they were both the same, and that was another very close election. Although it was decided pretty quickly by the actual popular voters and all that. Oh, and another thing people didn't like about these elections, and it happens for 1, 2, 3 of these elections, is that the winner of the popular vote did not win the electoral college. So the guy who won did not win more votes than the guy who lost. All right. So Bush wound up winning. People say it changed the course of history. Like I said, they were pretty aligned on foreign policy. Although he would have had, he would have appointed Democratic advisors and stuff. But of course, it was the attacks that sort of changed the views of foreign policy, where the Democrats became more of the peace party and the Republicans the war party. And that sort of even maybe shifted back a bit, even though we're not, the Democrats are still opposed to the actual American military getting involved. They're more supportive of providing arms and stuff to allies. Anyway, would it have changed history? Maybe. Alright, number 2, the second, and the last 2 are actually, we're going back to Congress, but in a different way. Remember how I brought up the election certification? These both have to do with the election certification. This is the 2020. Oh, and I do want to say one more thing, because it matters for the 2020 race, is that the accusations of voter fraud and suppression were not credible, very credible on, actually, no one made the accusation. Sorry, not that they weren't credible. No one was actually making accusations. It was just the representatives trying to find some reason to overturn the election. But in 2020, number 2, some people were making accusations. The accusations in this case, the accusations were made, but in this case, they weren't credible. All right. So in 2000, no accusations were made. In 2020, accusations were made that were not credible about voter fraud. This one was solely about voter fraud. In 2000, it was more about voter suppression than voter fraud. But in 2020, it was all about voter fraud, accusations of voter fraud. So after the election, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people... Oh, I'm talking too loud. I'm seeing the little red bar. Alright, I'm going to try and talk quieter. Alright, so the COVID-19 pandemic was happening, and people voted by mail, and that led many people to accuse that system of being rife with fraud. Some people were never going to trust it on both sides. I mean, there's just some people who don't trust to do things. But I think for the most part, people were just using it as an excuse to try and overturn the election. And so again, we had objections being raised. This time, a senator and a representative objected to the vote count, which is presented here. All right. These ones objections attempted. I think that means that just a representative tried to do it, not a senator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And would that if they switched those votes, would that have even mattered? 11, 20, 33, 32 plus 33 is... So yeah, if these two had been overruled and given to Trump, they wouldn't have mattered. It still would have gone to Biden with these states that didn't... I'm guessing that's what this means, objections attempted. They wouldn't have been... They wouldn't have changed the election. Or the results of the election. Alright. And, so while this was happening... I guess... Yeah, there was a riot outside. Well, let's actually start with the electoral count. I had that there for a reason. Like I said, I did prepare for this. So the electoral count of 1887, remember that date, it's going to be important. 1887 said that basically you have to certify the votes. Al Gore had no power to overturn his loss. He has to open the certificates, and the objections to the things has to happen by the vice president. Can't do anything. The objections have to be raised by a senator and a representative. That is because of this, the Electoral Count Act of 1887. All right, but there were some protests outside of the Capitol on that day, and some people, most people, I think, probably never heard of the Electoral Count Act. They just heard that the vice president can overturn the election, and they wanted the vice president, Mr. Mike Pence, this feller, to overturn the election. He said, I can't. Some people who knew a bit more about this stuff tried to say that the Electoral Count Act was unconstitutional, which it wasn't. I believe that the language of the Constitution says by Congress. It doesn't say anything about the vice president or the head of the House doing anything. The what do you call it? The chairman of the Senate, which is what the vice president is acting as during this time. Yeah, he's not given any power in the Constitution, and this is not taking any power away from him because it's power he never had. But it's just clarifying things, and it was further clarified in 2022 after the 2020 election. So, where was I? Anyway, they were outside, they were protesting, and the protest became a riot. They stormed the Capitol, and see, they're trying to attack people. Some people died on the day, and our body count is rising. So this is the second one with a body count. The attack was a 7-part plan. I didn't read this part. So I say I prepared. I didn't read the whole articles. What's the 7-part plan? I had a 7-part plan. Oh, this is from the hearings. Trump had knowledge that he lost. Planned to remove Attorney General. Pressured Vice President. State lawmakers. Okay, well, I wouldn't call this a 7-part plan. I would say it's 7 things he tried. These parts aren't really dependent on other parts. Okay. Anyway, they came in, and the electoral count was delayed. They had to evacuate the building, and there was... I think there's a video here. The video's actually not that chilling. I thought it would be more chilling. There was someone came with a car for the vice president, someone from the Secret Service, and Mike Pence said, "I'm not getting in that car." And when I read that article, I was floored. I'm like, that is scary. Anyway, it failed. the elections were certified. The House was in the hands of the Democrats at this time, and they were never going to vote to overturn the election. And unlike the, they don't vote state by state. Each representative gets their own vote in these votes. All right, so yeah, 5 deaths. 1 from gunshot, 1 from drug overdose, 3 from natural causes. So body count rising. Even if you just count this gunshot death, there's still a, and you say that these are unrelated. That guy would have overdosed anyway, maybe. Even if you just count this one, there's another one with a body count. All right, but ultimately Joe Biden won, and that brings us to the single most contested election in U.S. history. 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. There was no riot, no real protest. It was harder to mobilize, but even still, they could have, and they didn't. The reason why I ranked this one higher than the one that actually had a riot was it worked. The attempt to overturn the results of the election worked. Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, the initial returns were for Tilden, but the Congress overturned those and gave them to Hayes. Now, this was ultimately the result of a compromise. They decided, at the time, this was the end of Reconstruction, and there were still federal troops occupying Louisiana and South Carolina. Notice that those are 2 of the states that are contested in this election. So, how do you even have an election when your state is being occupied? I don't even know how that works. But they tried it, and I guess they failed because the results wound up being overturned. In South Carolina, there were accusations both of voter fraud and of voter suppression in this election. So, 2000 allegations of voter suppression, 2020 allegations of voter fraud, 1876 allegations of voter fraud and voter suppression. So they signed a compromise, and the result of the compromise was that the Reconstruction would end. That the troops would leave South Carolina and Louisiana, ending the era of Reconstruction, giving Hayes the presidency, ending the era of Reconstruction, and starting the Jim Crow era. And it was becoming untenable. There were a lot of racism and lynchings and stuff in northern states that didn't secede. So it became difficult to justify having troops in the South when there was violence and suppression of African Americans in the North. And you couldn't put troops in the North because they never rebelled against the Union. So it did become difficult to justify them. So they were probably going to end Reconstruction soon anyway, but this deal made it end now. And so, they were contested, and we talked about them wanting the vice president to do things here, and how Gore tragically had to look over his own loss, and that maybe he could have done it, but no, because of the Electoral Count Act of when? 1887. In 1876, that Count Act hadn't happened yet, and some people did think that the vice president had the authority to throw things out, to just not open the certifications, and to not certify the election. But there was no vice president at the time. This was the election the year before. Henry Wilson died in 1875. So there was no vice president at the time. So they had to just figure out what to do on the fly. And ultimately, they got in a back room, they talked about it, and they just made that compromise. Hayes had already determined he was only going to be president for one term. He was not going to run for a second term. And so he got to be president. Reconstruction ended. And like I said about how difficult it is to have an election under occupation, many of the states in this one were also thrown out. Arkansas, Louisiana. They tried to throw these out, but they didn't. Yeah, these two got rejected, I guess. I don't know. I'm not reading this right. During the joint session of Congress, the county electoral vote on February 17th, 5 states had objections that were raised regarding the results. However, unlike Jefferson, these did not affect the outcome of the election. Electors counted yes, yes, yes. Oh, yeah, I remember this one. Because Horace Greeley, this guy here, he was dead before the election. And he got second place. Grant was very popular. And these states kind of had to vote for him because of Reconstruction. Alright, but there was a lot of irregularities, and votes got thrown out, and they tried it again here, and this time it mattered. Anyway, this is the most contentious election, and the only election to have the election day results be overturned. So yeah, I'm going to have some honorable mentions. Most countdown lists to the honorable mentions before number 1, but for reasons, I'm going to do it after. First, I'm going to do this one, which is the election of 1888, which was won by Benjamin Harrison. The reason it's an interesting one is that a year later, not a year, I keep saying a year, in the next election, it was Grover Cleveland came back and beat him. He was the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. And because of that, he's one of 3 presidents who ever won the popular vote 3 times. FDR won it 4 times because he won 4 elections. Grover Cleveland here, he won this election popular vote. He won the election we just talked about as popular vote, and he was already president then. So again, he was consecutive. He won this election's popular vote. So he won the popular vote 3 times. The other one would, of course, been Andrew Jackson from before. He won the popular vote the first time, ran again, won 2 terms. So he won the popular vote how many times? 3 times. All right. So that's sort of an honorable mention because, he didn't contest the results of the election so much, but he came back and won. Probably because he knew he won the popular vote. The same thing that happened in 1824. Up until 2000, I'm not counting. I don't like to count 76 in the whole popular vote, electoral vote counting. But up until 2000, everyone who had lost the popular vote, who had won the popular vote but lost the electoral college, came back and won again. And another honorable mention is 1860. This one doesn't count because the actual candidates didn't object. Breckinridge didn't really object to the results, but later on. But a lot of people did object, even if the candidates didn't, so much that they seceded from the Union and started a bloody civil war. So, we mentioned body counts earlier. This one has the largest body count of them all, of any election. Yeah. So, we're not going to talk about the elections, just the Civil War. Like, the candidates didn't object, but Breckinridge, I believe, did join the Confederacy. Breckinridge, Confederate Secretary of War. And did Bell join the Confederacy? Secretary of War, Speaker of the House, Judicial Committee, Tennessee Senate. When did he die? 1859. Okay, so, what? Oh, that's not death. That's when he died. 1869. Civil War. In the months leading Bell remained during Lincoln, according to Bell, no intention of using force against the South. Bell continued to believe that Ellicott complained that he felt deceived by Lincoln while he still supported preserve defection to the Confederates. So he did ultimately defect, but only because the war had happened, which that never made much sense to me. A lot of people, there were the upper states and some politicians only defected after the war started, which never really made sense to me. But anyway. Alright. So that is my honorable mention. Civil War caused... But of course... Oh, and we have Stephen Douglas, who I'm pretty sure did stay with the Union. And honestly, I think Stephen Douglas did more to, I guess... I don't know how to say it. But anyway, in the 1860 election, he stood to his principles, and he refused to let slave owners take over the Democratic Party and make a part of the DNC's platform that slavery would be part of the entire country. Basically, slavery would be legal everywhere. People were trying to do that. Stephen Douglas said no, even though that probably would have won the nomination and maybe the election. I don't know. All right. But the 1860 DNC probably more responsible for the Civil War than the actual election, because it made the election go the way it did, I think. 1860 DNC, very interesting. People who say that Stephen Douglas was a secret puppet of the slave power, I mean, if he was, he wouldn't have stuck to his guns on popular sovereignty, even in the face of criticism from slave owners. All right, and now we have a dishonorable mention. We've been talking so much about America fighting each other and being disharmony. Let's go to the dishonorable mention, which is the elections that weren't contested at all. And the only real one is this one, 1820, which James Monroe, just him. He didn't get 3 electoral votes. Some voted for Adams. I don't know why. Which Adams? Who cares? Was it the Quincy or John? Who cares? Yeah. But, yeah. And if you look at the election before, look at that. That's probably why no one ran. Because he whooped him. There had been bigger whoopings, but yeah. This was known as the era of good feelings. So you may be thinking, what about Washington? Didn't he win unanimously? Yes, but the way elections worked was a bit different. In 1789, there was a contest for the vice presidency. George Washington won all of the votes for president, but remember, at this time, president and vice president were elected at the same time. So these 34 votes for Adams are not votes for him to be vice president. They are votes for him to be president. So he won. So he was actually running to be president, and it was contested very well. Okay, it was a bit more contested in the next election when Clinton got almost as many votes. So yeah, it was pretty contested there. I wonder if you add these up. No, they don't. They still don't match. Yeah, so this election was contested. Even though Washington was always going to be president, there was actually contention and contest in the election itself. But here in 1820, it's no contest. Maybe we should go back to that time where people don't contest elections. Is that a democracy? I don't know. Anyway, first channel, don't care. Let's actually pose for the thumbnail. Let's see. Let's do this 1824, this complicated one. What face should I do? Like a surprise, or like a or I think just surprise. Yeah, that'll be the thumbnail. Bye.